The scream came just seconds after the orchestra stopped playing. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the grand ballroom of the Royal Crest Hotel in Manhattan, where the richest people in the city had gathered for what was supposed to be the most elegant charity gala of the year. Expensive suits and glittering gowns filled the room while waiters moved quietly between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks and delicate desserts. At the center of it all stood Richard Houston, one of the most powerful billionaires in America. His charity foundation had built hospitals, funded schools, and donated millions to disaster relief across the country. Tonight's gala was meant to celebrate generosity, hope, and the good that money could do in the world. But hope vanished in an instant, because standing near the marble staircase at the entrance of the ballroom was a woman no one had invited. Her coat looked ordinary at first glance. Dark gray, slightly oversized, the kind of coat you might see someone wear on a cold winter night in New York. Yet something about her presence felt wrong. Her shoulders were tense, and her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for something or maybe waiting for something. The first person who noticed the wires was a young waitress named Emily. She had just stepped toward the woman to politely ask if she needed help when the coat shifted slightly. Beneath the fabric, Emily saw a cluster of wires taped to a blocky metal device strapped tightly around the woman's waist. Her tray slipped from her hands and shattered against the marble floor. For a brief moment, no one understood why she looked so terrified. Then Emily screamed. People turned toward the entrance as the woman slowly raised her hands. "I don't want anyone to come closer," she said in a trembling voice that somehow echoed through the entire ballroom. "Everyone stay where you are." The room fell into a silence so deep that even the musicians on stage froze with their instruments in midair. Several guests stared at the wires now clearly visible beneath the coat. Someone whispered the word bomb, and suddenly the meaning spread across the room like wildfire. Panic erupted. Chairs scraped across the floor as people tried to stand up and move away. A few guests rushed toward the exits while others ducked beneath tables, as if hiding could somehow protect them from what might happen next. Richard Houston stood frozen near the stage, his face pale, as he stared at the woman. "What do you want?" he finally asked. The woman looked directly at him. "You," she replied. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Security guards near the entrance hesitated, unsure of what to do. If they rushed her, she might trigger the device. If they did nothing, the entire ballroom remained in danger. And then something even stranger happened. In the far corner of the room, where the gala staff usually waited quietly out of sight, a tall man in a simple delivery uniform stepped forward. No one had noticed him before. He looked nothing like the wealthy guests surrounding him. His jacket carried the faded logo of a local courier company, and his shoes were worn from long hours of walking city streets. Yet the way he looked at the woman was different from everyone else. While others saw a threat, he seemed to see something else entirely. Slowly and calmly, he began walking toward her. "Sir, please stop," one of the guards whispered urgently. "You could set her off." But the stranger kept moving. The woman noticed him approaching, and her hands tightened nervously. "Don't come any closer," she warned. The stranger raised his empty hands to show he carried nothing. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. The entire ballroom held its breath. Because while no one else dared move, this unknown delivery driver was now standing only a few feet away from a woman wearing what looked like a bomb. And in the next few seconds, he would say something that would make the woman's eyes widen in shock. Something that would reveal he already knew who she was. But what he said next would also prove that this night was never just about a bomb. Just before we get back to it, I'm curious to know, where are you watching from today? And if these stories have been keeping you captivated, be sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. The stranger stopped only a few steps away from the woman, and the device strapped to her waist, while hundreds of terrified eyes followed his every movement. No one in the ballroom dared breathe too loudly because every small sound felt dangerous now. The orchestra members had slowly lowered their instruments, and even the security guards who were trained to react quickly stood frozen, unsure whether a single wrong move might trigger the explosive. The man in the delivery jacket studied the woman carefully and spoke in a calm, steady voice that did not match the chaos filling the room. "Sarah, you don't want to do this." The woman's eyes widened instantly. For a second, the trembling in her hand stopped. "You," she whispered, as if trying to place a memory that refused to come clearly. "How do you know my name?" A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. None of them understood what was happening. To them, the stranger looked like an ordinary courier who had somehow wandered into a high society event he clearly did not belong to. Yet he spoke to the woman as if he had known her for years. The man glanced briefly at the wires before returning his gaze to her face. "I remember the bus station in Cleveland," he said quietly. "6 winters ago. You were carrying a red backpack and crying because you had nowhere to go." The woman's breathing suddenly became uneven. The guests exchanged nervous looks while security officers slowly shifted closer to the walls, hopping to position themselves without drawing attention. "You're lying," the woman said quickly, though her voice no longer sounded certain. The man shook his head gently. "You had just lost your job at the diner, and your landlord had locked you out of your apartment. You were sitting on that wooden bench near the ticket counter trying to figure out how to survive the night." Her fingers tightened around the small switch she held in her palm. "Stop talking," she warned. But the stranger continued speaking, as if he knew the only way to stop what might happen was to remind her of something she had almost forgotten. "You told me you hadn't eaten for 2 days. You were embarrassed, but you finally accepted the sandwich I offered you." For a brief moment, the woman looked as if the memory had pulled her far away from the ballroom. "You bought me food," she said slowly. The man nodded. "I also bought you a bus ticket." The entire room was silent, except for the faint hum of the chandeliers above them. Richard Halston watched carefully from near the stage, his mind racing, as he tried to understand why this ordinary delivery driver seemed to be the only person capable of reaching the woman. "You were supposed to go to Chicago," the man continued. "You said you wanted a fresh start." The woman let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. "A fresh start," she repeated bitterly. "Is that what you think happened?" Her hand trembled again near the device. Across the room, one of the security guards quietly whispered into a radio, calling the bomb squad, but no one dared move closer. "You were kind to me that night," the woman said, looking at the stranger again, "but kindness doesn't change the world." The stranger did not argue. Instead, he asked a simple question. "What happened after Chicago?" For a long moment, the woman said nothing. Then her face hardened. "Everything that happened because of him." She lifted her chin and pointed directly toward the stage where Richard Halston stood. Gasps filled the ballroom. The billionaire slowly stepped forward, his expression filled with confusion. "I don't even know you," he said carefully. The woman's eyes burned with anger. "Oh, you will," she replied. The stranger looked between them both and realized something was terribly wrong. Because whatever story connected this frightened woman to the billionaire, hosting the gala clearly went far deeper than anyone in that room understood. And the truth she was about to reveal would shock every person in that ballroom. The ballroom no longer looked like a place for celebration. The elegant tables covered with white linen now felt like obstacles in a room full of fear. The glittering chandeliers above still cast their warm golden light across the hall, but the warmth meant nothing anymore. Every guest remained frozen in their seats or crouched behind chairs, watching the terrifying scene unfold near the entrance. Sarah slowly lowered her pointing hand, but her eyes remained locked on Richard Houston. "You say you don't know me," she said with a bitter smile that looked more painful than angry. "That's the problem with people like you. You don't remember the people whose lives you destroy." Houston frowned deeply. His voice was controlled but confused. "I have never seen you before tonight," he said. Sarah laughed again, though there was no joy in the sound. "Of course you haven't. To you, I was just another file, another case number, another person who disappeared quietly." The delivery driver standing near her remained calm, even though everyone else in the room looked terrified. He had not moved an inch closer, yet he also had not stepped away. His eyes stayed focused on Sarah, as if he understood that every word she spoke carried the weight of something that had been building inside her for years. "Sarah," he said gently, "talk to me." For a moment, her angry expression softened as she looked at him again. She still had not remembered his name, but the memory of that cold night at the Cleveland bus station was slowly returning. "You helped me once," she said quietly. "You gave me a sandwich and a ticket when no one else cared whether I lived or died." The stranger nodded slightly. "And tonight I'm trying to help you again." She shook her head. "It's too late for help." A murmur spread through the crowd as several guests whispered nervously to each other. Some of them slowly pulled out their phones, hoping to record what was happening, while others kept their eyes fixed on the wires strapped around Sarah's waist. The stranger spoke again. "Tell me what happened after Chicago." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I did exactly what I promised you that night," she said. "I tried to start over." Her eyes drifted toward the floor for a brief moment, as if the memory hurt to relive. "I found a job cleaning rooms at a small hotel. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to rent a tiny apartment. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe my life was finally moving forward." Several people in the audience leaned forward, slightly listening carefully now. Even the guards seemed to understand that the stranger was buying time. Sarah continued speaking, though her voice grew heavier. "Then one morning, the manager called everyone into the lobby. He said the building had been sold to a large development company. We were told we had 30 days before the hotel would close." The stranger frowned. "Development company?" Sarah slowly lifted her eyes back toward the stage. "Houston Urban Development." The room became silent again. All eyes turned toward Richard Houston. The billionaire looked surprised. "My company buys and renovates buildings across the country," he said slowly. "But I personally have nothing to do with individual employees." Sarah's voice suddenly sharpened. "You shut down that hotel and turned it into luxury apartments no one like me could afford. Hundreds of workers lost their jobs overnight." Houston shook his head. "Those decisions are made by managers and legal teams. I can't control every situation." "Exactly," Sarah snapped. "You never see the damage your empire leaves behind." The stranger watched her carefully, realizing that her anger was not just about losing a job. Something worse had happened. "What happened after the hotel closed?" he asked quietly. Sarah's breathing grew heavier, and for a moment it looked like she might refuse to answer. Then she spoke again, but this time her voice sounded far more fragile. "I got sick." The delivery driver's expression changed. "How sick?" Sarah gave a slow, painful laugh. "Sick enough that I needed surgery. Sick enough that without health insurance I had no way to pay for it." The guests shifted uneasily in their seats. "I tried everything," she continued. "Extra jobs, selling what little I owned. I even slept in shelters trying to save money." Her eyes slowly filled with tears. But it still wasn't enough. The stranger felt a heavy weight settle in his chest, because he already knew what kind of story this was becoming. And when Sarah looked up again, her next words sent a chill through the entire room. "The hospital told me If I couldn't pay for the operation, I would probably be dead within a year. Several guests gasped quietly. Sarah raised the small switch in her hand, slightly reminding everyone in the room how dangerous the situation still was. "So tell me," she said, staring at Halston, "when people like me disappear because your business decisions destroy our lives, do you ever even notice?" But before Halston could answer, something unexpected happened. The stranger suddenly recognized the name of the hospital she had just mentioned. And that realization made his heart skip, because it meant the truth behind Sarah's story was even more complicated than she believed. For a moment, the stranger said nothing. The name of the hospital Sarah had mentioned kept echoing in his mind, and the realization that followed made his stomach tighten. Around them, the ballroom remained frozen in fear, yet the man in the delivery jacket was thinking about something that no one else in the room had connected. "Sarah," he said carefully, his voice calm but more serious than before, "what hospital did you say it was?" She looked at him suspiciously. "St. Matthew's Medical Center in Chicago," she replied. "Why does it matter?" A few guests whispered quietly among themselves, while the security guards kept their eyes on the device strapped to her waist. The stranger slowly nodded. "I know that hospital," he said. Sarah frowned. "So what?" The man hesitated briefly, as if choosing his words very carefully. "St. Matthew's runs one of the largest charity surgery programs in the Midwest. They treat patients who can't afford operations." Sarah's expression instantly hardened. "Don't say another word," she warned. But the stranger continued speaking gently. "They receive millions in donations every year, so people like you can get life-saving treatment." Her eyes burned with anger. "You think I didn't try that?" she snapped. "You think I didn't beg them for help?" Across the room, several guests shifted uncomfortably. Richard Halston stood very still, listening closely now. "I filled out every form they gave me," Sarah continued. "I waited in lines that stretched down the hallway. I spoke to every social worker they sent me to." Her breathing grew faster. "And every single time they told me the same thing. The program was full. The waiting list was too long. They said there were too many patients." The stranger slowly nodded again, but his voice remained steady. "Did they ever tell you where that funding came from?" Sarah looked confused for a second. "What are you talking about?" The man turned slightly toward the stage, where Richard Halston stood. "The St. Matthew's Charity Surgery Program was created 8 years ago," he said, "and it's funded almost entirely by one foundation." Murmurs spread across the room as people began to understand where he was going with this. Sarah followed his gaze toward the billionaire. Her expression slowly shifted from anger to disbelief. "No," she whispered. The stranger spoke quietly, but clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "The Halston Foundation." Silence filled the room again. Richard Halston looked genuinely shocked now. "My foundation has funded thousands of surgeries through that program," he said slowly. "If someone was turned away, there must have been a mistake." Sarah stared at him with confusion and rage fighting inside her. "They told me there was no money left," she said. The stranger shook his head slightly. "That program receives enough funding to perform hundreds of operations every year." Sarah's hand trembled again around the switch. "So you're saying they lied to me?" she asked. "I'm saying something doesn't add up," the stranger replied. Several guests leaned closer, listening to every word now. Even the security guards had stopped whispering into their radios. Sarah's mind raced, trying to understand what he was suggesting. For months, she had believed that the wealthy businessman standing across the room had indirectly destroyed her life. That belief had fueled the anger that brought her to this moment. But if the hospital had money to help her, then why had they refused? The stranger watched the confusion growing in her face. "What name did you give them when you applied?" he asked gently. Sarah hesitated. "My name," she answered slowly, "Sarah Mitchell." The stranger's brow furrowed. "And they said there was no record of you being eligible." "They said my case had already been reviewed and rejected," she replied. A strange tension filled the air, because something about that answer clearly bothered the stranger. He thought for a moment, then asked another question. "Did they ever ask if you had family?" Sarah's expression darkened instantly. "I told them the truth," she said quietly, "that I had no one." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, as if another piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. Across the room, Richard Halston suddenly spoke again. "Wait," the billionaire said slowly. "Did you say your last name is Mitchell?" Sarah looked back at him sharply. "Yes." Halston stepped forward slightly, his face filled with confusion. "That's strange," he said, "because my foundation approved a surgery for someone with that exact name 2 years ago." The entire room seemed to stop breathing again. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered. But the stranger felt a cold realization spreading through his mind. Because if the surgery had already been approved for Sarah Mitchell, then it meant someone else had used her identity. And whoever had done that might be the real reason she had been left to die. The words hung in the air like a sudden crack of thunder. Someone else had used her identity. For several seconds, Sarah stood completely still. Her fingers still held the small switch connected to the device around her waist, but her mind had clearly drifted far away from the ballroom. "What did you just say?" she asked slowly. Richard Halston spoke carefully, now aware that every word mattered. "My foundation approved funding for a patient named Sarah Mitchell 2 years ago," he repeated. "The hospital submitted the request and the surgery was paid for." Murmurs spread across the crowd again. Many guests were now leaning forward, listening closely. What had started as a terrifying standoff was turning into something none of them had expected. A mystery. Sarah's head slowly shook, as if she was trying to reject what she had just heard. "No," she whispered, "that can't be true." The stranger standing near her watched the conflict in her eyes. "When did the hospital tell you that your application was rejected?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "About 2.5 years ago." The man nodded thoughtfully. "And when did they say the decision had already been made?" Sarah thought for a moment. "They said my case had already been processed weeks earlier." The stranger's voice remained calm but firm. "Did you ever receive any official letter from them?" She looked confused. "No, they said it wasn't necessary. The social worker just told me the decision had already been finalized." The delivery driver slowly exhaled. Something was definitely wrong. Across the room, one of the security officers quietly whispered to another guard, but neither of them moved. It was clear now that the stranger was the only person who had managed to keep Sarah from pressing the switch. Halston spoke again. "If someone used your identity, then the hospital records should show who actually received the operation," he said. Sarah's breathing became uneven. "I never even thought about that," she admitted. The stranger nodded slightly. "Because you trusted what they told you." For a moment, Sarah's anger seemed to weaken, and confusion took its place. She had spent years believing the world had simply turned its back on her. She believed the rich businessman standing across the room represented everything that had destroyed her chance to survive. But if the money had been approved, then someone else had taken what was meant for her. "Why would anyone do that?" she asked quietly. The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the stage again, studying Richard Halston carefully. "There are people who make a lot of money manipulating medical systems," he said. "Insurance fraud, identity fraud, illegal patient transfers." Several guests exchanged shocked looks. "You're saying someone stole her surgery?" Halston asked. "It's possible," the stranger replied. Sarah suddenly felt dizzy. The weight of everything she believed for the last 2 years was starting to crumble. "If that's true," she said slowly. Her voice cracked. "Then I almost died because someone else pretended to be me." The room remained silent. The stranger took a slow step closer. Sarah noticed, but this time she didn't warn him to stop. "What illness were you diagnosed with?" he asked. Sarah hesitated before answering. "A tumor," she said quietly. "It was growing near my spine." Several people in the room gasped softly. They said without surgery, it would eventually paralyze me. The stranger glanced at the device around her waist again, before looking back into her eyes. "And did it?" Sarah slowly shook her head. "No," she said. "It stopped growing after a while." The stranger frowned. "That's unusual." She gave a weak shrug. "The doctor said sometimes the body fights back." The man remained silent for a moment, thinking carefully. Then he asked a question that made Sarah's heart skip. "Did they ever run another scan after the tumor stopped growing?" She blinked. "No, I couldn't afford it." The stranger's expression changed. Because suddenly, another possibility entered his mind. One that could change everything Sarah believed about her own condition. But before he could speak again, something unexpected happened. One of the guests near the back of the ballroom suddenly stood up in shock. He had been quietly looking at something on his phone. Now his voice trembled as he pointed toward Sarah. "I think I know who stole her identity." Just before we get back to the story, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? And if you're enjoying this journey so far, make sure you're subscribed for more stories like this. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the man who had suddenly stood up. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. His phone trembled slightly in his hand, and the color had drained from his face. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Sarah looked over in confusion, though the small switch was still clutched tightly in her fingers. "What are you talking about?" one of the guests near him whispered. The man slowly stepped out from behind the table where he had been sitting. He was dressed in an expensive navy suit, and judging by the nervous looks others gave him, he was someone important. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm a medical consultant." The stranger in the delivery jacket watched him carefully. "What did you find?" he asked. Daniel lifted his phone slightly. "When you said the hospital was St. Matthew's in Chicago, I started searching their surgical grant reports. Hospitals receiving large charity funding usually publish annual summaries." The guests around him leaned closer. "What does that have to do with her?" someone asked. Daniel swallowed hard. There was a patient listed 2 years ago under the name Sarah Mitchell, who received a fully funded spinal tumor surgery through the Halston Foundation. Sarah's breathing became heavier again. "That's what he just said," she replied, pointing toward Richard Halston. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, but that's not the strange part." The room went quiet again. Daniel turned his phone, so the stranger and Sarah could see the screen, though they were still several feet away. "The strange part is the doctor who performed the surgery." The stranger narrowed his eyes. "Who was it?" Daniel hesitated. "Dr. Victor Lang." A wave of recognition passed through several guests in the room. Some whispered his name while others looked toward Richard Halston. Halston's expression changed immediately. "Victor Lang," he repeated slowly. Sarah looked between them in confusion. "Who is that?" Halston answered quietly. "He used to be the chief surgeon at St. Matthew's." Daniel spoke again, but his voice carried something darker now. "He was also fired 18 months ago after an internal investigation." The tension in the room thickened instantly. For what? The stranger asked. Daniel took a deep breath. Medical fraud. Several people gasped. He was accused of manipulating patient records and performing unauthorized procedures under false identities, Daniel continued. But the hospital never released full details to the public. Sarah stared at him, trying to process the words. So you're saying that doctor? Daniel nodded grimly. It's possible he used your identity to approve surgery for another patient. The stranger looked at Sarah again. Do you remember the name of the social worker who told you your application was rejected? Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to recall. There were several people, but one of them kept appearing every time I asked about my case. What was her name? He asked gently. Sarah opened her eyes slowly. Lydia, she whispered. Lydia Harper. Daniel's fingers quickly moved across his phone again. He searched through another hospital report. Then suddenly he froze. Oh no! The words slipped out before he could stop them. The stranger looked at him sharply. What is it? Daniel slowly lifted his head, his face pale. The assistant assigned to Dr. Victor Lang during that time. He turned the phone screen toward them, though they still couldn't see the details clearly. Her name was Lydia Harper. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. Sarah felt her legs weaken. So they worked together, she whispered. The stranger nodded slowly. It looks that way. Her voice trembled. They told me there was no help left, while they were using my name to treat someone else. Her anger began to rise again, though now it was mixed with something deeper. Betrayal. But the stranger noticed something else that didn't quite make sense. If this doctor was running a fraud scheme, he said slowly, then the question is why he needed your identity specifically. Sarah looked at him with confusion. What do you mean? He glanced toward Daniel. In fraud cases, they usually create fake names, not steal real ones from people who might eventually notice. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's true. The stranger's eyes returned to Sarah. So the real question is... He paused. Who was the patient that actually received your surgery? The ballroom grew quiet again. Because if someone had gone through such effort to steal her identity, that patient must have been someone very important. And at that exact moment, Daniel Reeves looked down at his phone again. His eyes widened in disbelief, because he had just found the name of the person who received that surgery. And when he slowly lifted his head toward the stage, his gaze landed directly on Richard Houston. The entire ballroom followed Daniel Reeves' gaze. Every pair of eyes slowly turned toward the stage where Richard Houston stood beneath the bright chandelier lights. The billionaire looked confused, but also slightly uneasy, as if he could already sense the direction this discovery was heading. Daniel swallowed before speaking. I need to be careful here, he said, because what I'm looking at is only a report summary, not the full medical record. The stranger in the delivery jacket stepped slightly closer to Sarah, though his voice remained calm. But the name of the patient is listed. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Sarah felt her pulse pounding in her ears. Her fingers were still wrapped around the small switch, yet for the first time since entering the ballroom, she had almost forgotten it was there. Just say it, she whispered. Daniel hesitated. The patient who received the spinal tumor surgery under the name Sarah Mitchell. He looked toward Richard Houston again. Was listed as an emergency case, transferred from a private clinic owned by Houston Medical Group. The room erupted in confusion. Richard Houston immediately shook his head. That doesn't make any sense, he said. My company owns several medical research facilities, but they do not perform patient transfers like that. Daniel raised his hand slightly. I'm only telling you what the report says. Sarah's anger flickered again, though now it was mixed with deep confusion. "So the surgery was connected to his company anyway," she said, staring at Halston. But the stranger quickly shook his head. "Wait," he said, "that doesn't mean he was involved." Halston nodded firmly. "My foundation donates money to hundreds of hospitals. The medical group only handles research and pharmaceutical trials." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. "Research trials?" Halston answered carefully. "Yes, experimental treatments for rare diseases." Sarah felt another wave of dizziness. The stranger looked back at Daniel. "Does the report say anything about the patient's real identity?" Daniel scrolled through the document again. "Not directly, but there's a note attached to the case." He paused as he read the small line of text. It says the patient identity was sealed due to security concerns related to the donor family. The room became silent again. Sarah looked lost. "What does that even mean?" The stranger looked toward Halston again. "Your family." Halston frowned. "My family has never needed surgery like that." But suddenly his expression changed. A flicker of realization crossed his face. "There was one situation," he said slowly. Several guests leaned forward. "What situation?" Daniel asked. Halston took a deep breath, as if remembering something painful. 2 years ago, my daughter Emily was diagnosed with a tumor near her spine." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "But the doctors said the tumor was benign and could be removed safely," Halston continued. "The surgery was performed at a private hospital in Boston." Daniel shook his head slightly. "The report I'm looking at says the patient's life was in immediate danger and required emergency treatment in Chicago." Halston looked genuinely shocked now. "That's impossible." The stranger studied him closely. "You're sure?" Halston nodded firmly. "I was there the entire time. My daughter's surgery was scheduled weeks in advance." Sarah's breathing became uneven again. "So if it wasn't your daughter?" Her voice trailed off. Daniel slowly lowered his phone. "There's one more detail," he said. Everyone looked at him again. The patient listed under Sarah Mitchell's identity. He hesitated. The hospital recorded the age as 19. Halston's eyes widened. "My daughter was 25. A heavy silence filled the ballroom. Because that meant the surgery had not been performed for Halston's daughter. Which left only one terrifying possibility. Someone inside the hospital system had stolen Sarah's identity to secretly treat a completely different patient. And whoever that patient was, their life had been considered important enough to hide behind layers of secrecy." Sarah slowly lifted her head again, her mind spinning. "So someone powerful needed that surgery," she whispered. The stranger nodded slowly. "It looks that way." But just as the room tried to process this new information, something unexpected happened. A quiet voice suddenly spoke from near the orchestra stage. A young woman who had been sitting among the musicians slowly stood up. Her face had turned pale and her hands trembled slightly. I think I know who the patient was." The young woman stepped forward slowly from the orchestra section, where several musicians had remained frozen since the chaos began. She looked no older than 20, with long dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, and a violin still resting against the chair behind her. Everyone in the ballroom turned toward her. The stranger in the delivery jacket studied her carefully, while Sarah watched with wide, confused eyes. "You know who the patient was?" Daniel Reeves asked cautiously. The young woman nodded, though she looked nervous, standing in front of so many powerful people. "My name is Anna Lang," she said quietly. The moment she said the last name, several people in the room stiffened. Daniel's eyes widened. "Lang," he repeated. She nodded again. "My father is Dr. Victor Lang." A ripple of shock spread across the ballroom. The stranger glanced briefly at Sarah before returning his attention to the young woman. "You said you know who the patient was," he said calmly. "How?" Anna took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. "Because I was there when everything happened." Sarah felt a strange chill run through her. "What do you mean you were there?" Anna's eyes filled with shame. 2 years ago I became very sick," she explained. "The doctors discovered a tumor near my spine." The room fell silent again. "My father was terrified," she continued. "He said the surgery was extremely expensive and experimental, and even with his salary he couldn't afford the treatment quickly enough." Daniel frowned. "But he was the chief surgeon at the hospital." Anna nodded sadly. "Yes, but hospital rules prevented him from operating on his own family members, and the insurance company refused to cover the procedure because they classified it as high risk." Sarah slowly began to understand where the story was heading. Anna continued speaking, her voice trembling. "My father said he would find another way to save me." Across the room, several guests exchanged uneasy glances. "What did he do?" the stranger asked. Anna wiped a tear from her cheek. "I didn't know at the time, but later I discovered he had accessed the charity surgery program records." Daniel's expression darkened. He found Sarah Mitchell's application. Anna nodded slowly. Her file had already been submitted to the Halston Foundation and approved for funding. Sarah's hands began shaking again, though this time it wasn't anger. It was shock. Anna lowered her head. "My father changed the patient name in the surgical schedule and used Sarah Mitchell's identity so the operation could be paid for by the charity program." The room filled with stunned whispers. Sarah stared at her in disbelief. "So you're telling me?" Her voice cracked. "The surgery that was meant to save my life saved yours instead." Anna's shoulders trembled. "Yes." For a moment no one spoke. The weight of the truth settled heavily over the ballroom. The stranger looked at Anna carefully. "Did your father know Sarah Mitchell personally?" Anna shook her head. "No, he only saw her name in the files." Daniel frowned. "Then why did the hospital tell Sarah her application had already been rejected?" Anna hesitated. "Because once my father changed the records, it appeared as if the surgery had already been performed." Sarah felt her knees weaken. All this time, she had believed the system had simply abandoned her. But the truth was much crueler. Someone had quietly stolen the chance meant for her. Anna looked directly at Sarah, now her eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know the truth until months later when the hospital investigation began," she said softly. "By then my father had already been fired." The stranger spoke again. "Where is he now?" Anna's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "He disappeared." The room grew tense again. "No one knows where he went after the investigation," she continued. "But before he left, he told me something." Sarah's fingers tightened slightly around the switch. "What?" Anna slowly lifted her eyes. "He said the woman whose identity he used," her voice trembled, "would probably come looking for answers one day." A heavy silence followed. Then Anna added something that made several people in the room shiver. "And he said if she ever found the truth, she would have every reason in the world to hate him." Sarah looked down at the device strapped around her waist. For the first time since arriving at the gala, the anger inside her felt different. Not explosive, but painfully clear. Yet before anyone could speak again, the stranger noticed something that made his heart race. Because the timer on the device around Sarah's waist had just started blinking. The blinking red light was small, almost easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention, but the stranger saw it instantly. His eyes sharpened. Every second now mattered. He could feel the tension in the ballroom spike as if the air itself had grown heavier. Guests froze where they stood, some hiding behind chairs, others gripping the edges of tables, all eyes locked on Sarah and the device strapped around her waist. Sarah's hands shook violently now. The switch she had been holding felt heavier than ever, and the realization that the situation had escalated beyond words hit her like a physical blow. She glanced at the delivery driver, and for a fraction of a second, fear and desperation crossed her face. I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't." The stranger took another step closer, slowly, deliberately. His voice was calm, measured, almost soothing, yet it carried an authority that made her pause. "Sarah," he said quietly, "look at me. No one here wants to hurt you, but we need to move, and we need to move carefully. The light is blinking for a reason. We can still fix this." Her eyes darted around the room. Guests were whispering, some frozen in fear, others crying softly. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw the switch and end everything, but part of her remembered the man who had once helped her at the bus station, the one who had given her food and hope when she had no one. Could she trust him now? The stranger continued, his voice gentle yet urgent. "Listen, you've been angry for a long time and you have every reason to be, but this isn't your fault. You're not responsible for what happened to you, and you don't have to make it worse for everyone else." Sarah's breathing hitched. Memories of lost years, of doctors telling her she was rejected, of the pain of almost dying, flashed through her mind. The anger that had driven her here, that had made her prepare this device, now clashed violently with the new truth Anna had revealed. Her hands wavered. The blinking light was faster now, almost impatient. "Sarah," the stranger said, lowering himself slightly so he was at her eye level, "I need you to trust me completely. Just a few more steps and I can remove that from you. I can save you, but only if you let me." The world felt suspended in that moment. Seconds stretched longer than minutes. Even Halston, Daniel Reeves, and Anna Lang held their breath, waiting for the next move. Sarah's eyes flickered between the man and the device. Her finger twitched. She could feel the weight of the years, the injustice, the betrayal, but also the chance to survive, to finally see the truth, to confront the person who had caused so much pain. And then she made her decision. Slowly, deliberately, she began a step backward, allowing the stranger to close the distance. The crowd remained silent, every heart pounding in unison. But just as she was within reach, a sharp noise rang from the balcony above, a loud metallic click that echoed through the ballroom. All eyes shot upward. From the shadows of the balcony, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in black, moving silently but with purpose. The stranger's expression hardened instantly, recognition flashing across his face. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "get down now." But it was too late. The figure on the balcony raised a device of their own, a second switch, synchronized with Sarah, and the timer on her device suddenly accelerated, blinking faster than ever. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests screamed, chairs clattered to the floor, and the golden chandeliers overhead seemed to shimmer with tension. Sarah froze, terror gripping her entirely. The stranger lunged forward, reaching for her just as the shadowed figure's plan began to unfold. And in that instant, the entire fate of the gala, the lives of everyone inside the room, and the long-buried secrets linking Sarah, Halston, and the mysterious doctor hung by a thread. Because the next move could change everything. The timer was still blinking, but now it wasn't just Sarah's life at stake. It was everyone's. And in the shadows, someone was smiling. The screen cuts to black. The cliffhanger is set. The question now lingers. Who is the figure on the balcony, and what do they truly want? Time slowed as the stranger lunged forward, grabbing Sarah just as the shadowed figure on the balcony stepped fully into view. The figure was tall and slender, their face partially hidden beneath a hood, but there was no mistaking the intent in their movements. Every guest in the ballroom had frozen again, caught between fear and disbelief, as the stranger pressed his body against Sarah to shield her. "Stay behind me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The blinking red light on Sarah's device seemed almost alive now, faster, more urgent, as if it sensed the presence of the other trigger. The figure on the balcony raised their hand, revealing a small remote. They didn't speak, but their eyes glinted with cold calculation. It was clear they were in control, and they knew it. The stranger's mind raced. He had only seconds to act. Slowly, he inched his hand towards Sarah's device while keeping his gaze fixed on the figure above. He noticed a small panel at the side, likely an override he could attempt. But one wrong move, one mistimed press, and the consequences could be catastrophic. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "I need you to trust me completely. Don't move your hands, not yet. Listen to my instructions." Her chest heaved and tears ran down her cheeks. I can't do it," she gasped. "I've failed so many times before. Why should I trust anyone now?" The stranger's eyes softened. "Because this is your chance. You've survived everything else, haven't you? You survived years of injustice, betrayal, and near death. You can survive this too, but only if we act together, right now." Sarah's gaze flicked to the shadowed figure, then back to him. She could see the tension in his face, the determination. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. Slowly, she nodded. The stranger moved his hand swiftly, pressing the tiny panel. Sparks of light flickered from the device as he worked to disengage the mechanism without triggering it. Above, the figure hesitated, their finger poised over the remote. Suddenly, Anna Lang stepped forward from the orchestra. "Stop," she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. The shadowed figure's head snapped toward her. "You can't do this. You don't know what's at stake." The figure's attention wavered for the briefest moment, long enough for the stranger to slip a small wire cutter into Sarah's device. With a precise movement, he snipped a critical connection. The blinking light slowed, then went out. The device was disarmed. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Guests collapsed into chairs or hugged each other, relief flooding the space. Sarah sank to the floor, trembling, the device now harmless at her feet. The shadowed figure froze, realizing their plan had failed. In that instant, the stranger moved quickly, pushing Sarah behind a sturdy table. Security personnel, who had been frozen moments before, finally rushed forward, forcing the figure back toward the balcony. But before they could apprehend them, the figure leapt from the railing and disappeared into the night outside, leaving only questions and fear behind. Sarah looked up at the stranger, her voice barely above a whisper. You saved me." He knelt beside her, holding her gaze. "No, you saved yourself. You just needed someone to show you it was possible." Richard Halston stepped forward, his face pale but filled with something new, admiration and relief. I don't even know how to thank you," he said to the stranger. The man shrugged lightly, almost embarrassed. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't need thanks, it just needs action." Sarah's eyes wandered around the room. She saw the shocked faces of guests, the worried expressions of security, and the trembling figure of Anna Lang, who had just revealed the truth of her father's actions. She realized with a pang of emotion that her life could have ended differently tonight, and yet here she was alive, with answers she had longed for. But one truth remained painfully clear. Even though the bomb was disarmed, the shadowed figure outside was still free. Someone had tried to manipulate her anger, her pain, and her desperation, and they had not yet revealed their full motive. Sarah stood slowly, hands trembling but no longer clinging to the device. She took a deep breath. "I survived this," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "And next time, I won't leave anything to chance." The stranger nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Then it's your turn to decide how your story continues." The ballroom erupted in cautious applause, relief and awe blending together. But in the shadows outside the Royal Crest Hotel, the figure on the balcony watched silently, plotting the next move. And for Sarah, for the first time in years, survival was not just about living. It was about confronting the truths, the lies, and the people who had tried to control her fate. The night had ended in chaos, but it had also opened a door, and the story of betrayal, courage, and justice was far from over. The camera would cut to black, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats, wondering, who was the figure on the balcony and would they return to finish what they started? The tale was concluded, but the lesson remained clear. Courage, empathy, and action could turn even the most desperate moments into survival, and sometimes the bravest step was trusting someone enough to let them guide you through the darkness. And that's the end of today's story. Share where you watch from in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe so you won't miss the next one.